said that forever changed your relationship with someone. Story 1. My mom asked me to forgive the man who essayed me for 7 years, ages 5 to 12, because it was her brother. Fast forward, told my dad, and he told me he doesn't understand my generation and their needs and asked me to let it go. Moved out after that. Story 2. You're a bad person just like your mother. Like a decade later, Dad asked for permission to attend Mom's funeral. They'd been divorced for 15 years, and he'd spent the entire time saying worse than that about her on a regular basis. But when he asked, that's what rang through my mind, so I said no. So around 15 years later, I'm in my mid-30s, and Dad is begging me to come be his medical proxy in the hospital, make decisions for him in his final days like I did for my mother. After talking it over with the kindest and most empathetic person I've ever known, I broke NC for the first time in years to ask if he needed me to pull the plug. Because my friend was right, it'd be wrong of me to leave a rabid dog hooked up to machines experiencing a lingering painful death, no matter how much it hurt me in the past. Story 3. She called me her safe space, her person. Time and time again, she proves what she feels with how easy it is for her to talk about the really heavy stuff when she feels alone in her struggles. And I'm all ears always. Story 4. What do you expect me to do about it? My mom, as she was dragging me back into my cousin's house after one of them tried to assault me. I was sitting in the living room, screaming for help, and instead of helping me, Mom came into the room and screamed at me to shut the hell up. I was acting like a spoiled brat as my cousin was shoving his foot into my attempting to. My nan was sitting to my left, my aunt was on a chair to my right. No one said or did anything to help me. Nan tells my mom what my cousin is doing. Mom looks and walks off. I don't remember how I got free, but I did, and ran. I left the house and started heading for the only person I knew there. Mom came after me and screamed it was all my fault. I was embarrassing. I asked her how she could just let him do that to me. Then she made the comment. I already knew I was alone, but I didn't understand why I felt that way, but I knew then. She confirmed it. Mom was never going to save me. She would let them do anything they wanted to me, and it would always be my fault. If I fought back, the adults would hurt me more. I was about 12 when this happened. I was shell-shocked for days after. I just shut down and felt wrong. Mom dragged me back inside, and her family tormented me for the rest of the evening over my tantrum. She said a lot of other stuff. That she hated I was a bad person. Why couldn't I be like every other kid out there? She wished she'd never had me, but I think that one hits the worst. She just saw the scene in front of her when my nan told her what was up and walked off. She just let it happen. I embarrassed her with my tantrum. She completely ignored what was happening to me. Story 5. I was 8 years old and my mom just married my stepdad and they had a son, my little brother. My step-grandma didn't know I was in the other room when she told my stepdad, "Why are you spending so much time on? You should spend more time on your real kid." Without missing a beat, he replied, "She is my kid too." I always remembered that, and from that day on, he was my dad. Story 6. I miscarried our baby 2 weeks after he left for deployment. Was gone for 3 months and 2 weeks. Within a week of him being back, he was making jokes like, "You didn't want me to be a dad." Then would be like, "Too soon?" while smiling and cow. Yeah, we aren't together anymore, and that's the short version. Story 7. My ex passed away, leaving me to raise my 2 kids, who both had disabilities alone. Instead of dealing with the trauma, I always dumped my kids on my mom to go drink. This happened for a few months before my nana invited me over to house to have a chat. She told me I had to stop running from my pain because I had to go through to get through it. My nan lost an adult child 20 years ago. What do you know? She was right. I stopped avoiding everyone, including the kids, stopped drinking all the time, and she was there for me without judgment. And I honestly don't know if I'd be here if it wasn't for her. Story 8. Maybe we need a divorce. Twice. Edit. I, foolishly, married young when I was in the military. Divorce number 1. A decade later, I divorced again with a different woman. I have 2 kids with 2 different moms. It's all a mess. I ruin everything. Stay away, y'all. Story 9. My grandma told me, "You are a sad, broken person," when I was literally 90% ready to end my life. She knew what I had just been through. She knew I had nothing left but had to defend my abusive grandfather that was driving me to. He passed away and she tried to mend the relationship, but I don't think I'll ever get over that. Story 10. I have stage 4 colorectal cancer and was having a large chunk of my liver removed 2 years ago. I called my son's dad to give him instructions in case anything happened as my adult son is bipolar and his dad doesn't give a cow. He said, "I hope you pass away, bad person." I'll never forget that one. Story 11. Very close friends with someone for 20 years. Maybe not like sisters, but like I considered her more like close cousins. Somewhere in a healing journey, I realized I was putting in most of the work and everyone else was more important to her, yada yada. I stopped reaching out as much. She calls out of the blue after like 3 months of not talking. We catch up for maybe a half hour and I tell her I've got to go. She exclaims, wait, hold on. and asks if I can give her a couple $100. At that moment, I realize the whole point of the call was to butter me up and ask for money. I very empathetically told her no, and her reaction was, okay, geez, I just thought I'd ask. At that point, I saw our whole friendship and fast forward and realized it had been a very, very subtle history of my way or the highway, and or what can you do for me? Our relationship only continued to fracture from there, and we drifted further and further apart. The last time I talked to her was November 2021, where she called attempting to look for gossip about a mutual acquaintance for God knows what reason she felt benefited her. Didn't have any to give, she said, "Kay, I'll talk to you later," and we haven't spoken since. It had been 6 months since I'd talked to her at that point, and the more time passes, the more I question why I even picked up that day. Story 12. I had a friend make some snide comments about the wig I picked out for my chemo hair loss. I was really trying hard to be brave and make the best of it. She said in a snotty tone, "I don't really picture you as a blonde. If I had chemo, I would not wear a wig at all." It was really like kicking someone when they are down. Shortly afterwards, she made a poor comment about where my husband was taking me for a vacation after my first chemo treatment, and I decided to instantly dump her. No explanation, just instantly I was done with her. I never spoke to her again. Story 13. In the middle of an argument, my wife told me, "You can be right or be married." She said she read it somewhere and it sounded perfect to her. Instead, I took it as a divorce ultimatum, which only caused more stress on me, and I actually considered divorce for the first time in our relationship. That boundary once crossed can never be undone. Story 14. When I told the person who assaulted me that they did not have my consent, and that what had happened led to me nearly terminating myself a couple months later, they replied, "Why do you put yourself in dangerous situations?" I mean, I was stupid to think that telling them what they did would matter. There were dozens of signs that this person was unsafe and unhealthy for me, but by God did that feel like a slap to the face more than anything else. Really knocked the sense into me, and I them off after that. On a more positive note, anytime anyone has ever earnestly said, "I'm sorry" to me, my dad apologizing for not protecting me against emotional abuse I endured from a relative growing up, my grandmother apologizing for rejecting me for being queer and coming around to accept me, etc. A genuine sorry does actually change the relationship forever, and for the better. But they have to actually mean it. Story 15. My sister told me during an argument that she thinks the reason my husband was depressed and wanted to terminate himself was because of me. I can't see her the same after that. It's all I think about every time we talk. Story 16. Probably the day my dad told me he wasn't going to live to see me graduate high school. He was insanely depressed at that time. I knew what he meant, that he wanted to terminate himself. It's been almost 15 years since he said that, and he's still kicking. But it was that moment that I realized I was going to have to be more of an adult in that relationship than he was. Story 17. A supposed friend of mine whom I had been playing in various bands with for years told me it wasn't my right to criticize a rehearsal. He also suspected me of doing candy. I don't even drink or breathe while he is an alcoholic. Well, thank you for showing how you see me, I guess. Story 18. Was dating a girl I worked with at the time. I was on my way to work and found out one of my best friends from college got into a car accident and passed away. I got to work, sat down at my desk, and just couldn't focus. So I told my manager, and he said, "Go home, take the day." I really appreciated that response. Then when my girlfriend got home, I was clearly devastated. I started talking about attending the funeral in DC while I was bawling. When she turned and said, "Oh, I have friends in DC, we can meet up with them," I was shocked that's where her thoughts immediately went to. It made me question her priorities in our relationship moving forward. We eventually broke up as she clearly wasn't the right person for me. Story 19. You are actually delusional, because I got so exasperated during a late-night argument that I used a metaphor to try to explain myself. That was the moment I realized how toxic and emotionally abusive it had become. Story 20. My dad was a self-employed, ultra-conservative, we didn't even have bootstraps and pick ourselves up kind of guy. And while I was completing my MBA, we talked shop, and he unintentionally admitted he was performing wire fraud kind of regularly for his business. The relationship was already on the downhill due to a variety of other factors, but that's the one that confirmed to me he wasn't just a narcissistic curmudgeon, that he was actually a bad human being. Haven't spoken in years. Story 21. Parent A told me the only reason I wasn't given up for adoption was because Parent B wanted me. Sunday school teacher told me that if she could, she'd send me to hell. Nobody at church believed. Story 22. My little sister was about to take the train to go to my dad's for his birthday. Parents are divorced. I finished all my schoolwork, so last minute, I called him excitedly to tell him not to go pick her up from the train station because I'd be bringing her and joining to celebrate. He paused and said they might not have enough food for an extra person. Broke something in me. After my mom tore him a new one, he called me back to tell me they would make it work and I'm welcome, but I obviously declined. Story 23. My extremely jealous ex-wife had a mental breakdown when I wouldn't give her the reassurance she demanded that I wasn't having an affair. This had gone on for years. I spent 20 minutes thinking, I'm going to have her committed, before she finally calmed down. She fell asleep and I went to sleep on the couch, but was so unsettled and worried she might try something that I was up most of the night. Things were never the same for me after that, and I brought it up about a year later to show her how unstable our marriage was when she apparently thought everything was fine. I told her, I didn't sleep because I was afraid you might come and stab me to death. I expected her to be dismissive or even laugh. Instead, all she said was, yeah, that was a really bad. Story 24. 72 hours after losing my father, my aunt said to me that my mother was dead. Haven't spoken to her since. I'm well aware that they both hated each other, and since my dad was gone, they were never going to talk again, but she had no right to say that. Me wanted to add that her grieving is not an excuse to be a bad person to your niece. I lost my father and I wasn't acting like a bad person. I also would never say that to my nieces or my nephews if something happened to either one of my brothers. Story 25. My father apologized for hitting us when we were kids. I saw the pain in his eyes, and in a flash he became a different person to me, much more layered. I was in college at the time, and it forever changed my relationship with him. Throughout the years, I've learned more about his upbringing and can understand how he became the father he became. Generational trauma is hard, but all of us have broken the cycle, have done the work, and have healed. Story 26. My soon-to-be husband said to me, if you are going to leave now, because once we buy a house, I won't let you. I did marry him, but he wouldn't leave his mother's house. He lived with her until he was in his late 30s. I left after 3 years of hell with a beautiful 5-year-old child. Story 27. I'm just Dave, ex-Uncle Dave. My aunt cheated on him and it broke my heart. Then he found another who was scared of old family ties. So he personally informed me he was no longer my uncle, despite being the best uncle ever. He tried to reconnect at the end of his life, but I didn't have time for just Dave. Story 28. Guy told me that women have no urethras and that we pee out of our ace. When I asked how I could get UTIs if I had no urethra, he asked me how I could possibly know. I just gave up on him after that. How thick do you have to be? Christ almighty on toast. Story 29. For me, it was a boyfriend of mine I still miss sometimes. I was 1,000 times more into him than he was into me, but I was too blind to see it at the time. One day, we had a discussion about why we always spent the night at his house and never in my apartment. What he said to me still bugs me. I don't know if you know what you have here, looking around the apartment, but it's not that much. I've never felt more worthless as a human or as a man. Needless to say, we didn't date for much longer after that. Story 30. My ex had been sick with an undiagnosed illness for the last half of our 15-year marriage. It kept her essentially bedridden, and all of our family's adult responsibilities fell to me. After 7 years, I was exhausted, depressed, and despondent. During an argument toward the end, she was upset that I wasn't being romantic and putting effort into our relationship. I told her that I had nothing left to give, that what she was getting from me was everything I had. That was the line that broke her. Story 31. I have another boyfriend coming to visit for a month, and we won't be seeing each other while he's here, but I'll message you when he goes back home. I'm like, don't bother. Story 32. She told me that her way of grieving the passing of her cat was to buy a kitten, bringing the total number of cats back up to 6. The only difference now is that the new cat would be the only one not infected with the contagious deadly disease that terminated the first one. She lives in her home with her 4 dogs, cats, and a dozen other caged animals, but has no one to hang out with because she prioritized that kitten over our 10-year friendship. Story 33. My brother once was blaming me for each and everything, including my relationship with my in-laws, and told me that you are not submissive enough and not buttering them enough, that's why your relationship is bad. So I asked him, okay, this is because of me then. Why are they saying bad things about my kid? Their own grandkid. He told me, that's your personal issue, and I'm not going to comment on it. That's the day I went VVLC with him. My mill is always abusive, horrible towards me, and my husband find no wrong in it. After many years, I said something back to my mill. It no cursing, no backtalk. Just tried to explain her my side, and I was polite, but husband found it offensive and said many things. I know from that day my relationship is over with him. Story 34. But only once while you were dating. My older sister telling me she was dating my ex-boyfriend who I was still getting over. Apparently they were secretly dating before he and I dated, and took up again after we broke up. This was the beginning of our complicated relationship where, no matter how many times I got over the latest bull cow, she manages to cow on me again. Thus, we are very low contact. She is very self-righteous and always seems to justify her actions. There is only so much tongue biting I can do. Story 35. Left the cult I was born into, and the Swami said many times, "You're burning your bridges and you can never come back." It taught me early in life that the bridges I burn light my way. Story 36. Your wife has stage 4 cancer and it's not curable, it's terminal, and we don't know how she has even been alive for the last 6 months. Yup, that will do it. Hey, stop that nonsense. Don't give this post any awards. Seriously, you are only paying Reddit. They terminated all third-party apps like RIF, Apollo, etc. So yeah, don't give these flipping idiots a dime. I will haunt every last one of you until my energy is completely gone if you support these that are just running the circus here. Was it America? Was it Reddit? What's he talking about? Who knows? The answer is flipping yes to all of the above. Well, not for America. I love us. But the ones running this flipping circus are seriously out of control, man. When do we decide we aren't getting enough peanuts? Story 37. I don't love you anymore. There's really nothing left to say after that. The only thing to do is try to superglue your heart shut temporarily so you can limp out the door and move on. Story 38. A former friend went off at me for recommending a movie to her because the movie had a trans leading character and she thought I was only recommending the movie to her based on that fact. She is trans, so she said, "You're only recommending me this because I'm trans? Just because I'm trans doesn't mean I'm going to like all movies with a trans lead. Never mind the fact it was a movie about a topic we both enjoy, vampires, and was a decent comedy. No, anyways. Made me feel like cow, so I stopped talking. Still mad about it though, made me feel like I was being transphobic for trying to show a movie I liked." Story 39. I grew up in a military household, and with that we moved very often. I was never in one place for more than 2 years. When I was in middle school, we moved to a new place and my parents decided that this was it. Dad was going to retire and we'd stay here. This was going to be home. We got a house off post and everything. As a preteen, I was so excited to finally feel like I was from somewhere. I let myself get close to other kids from school. In 8th grade, Dad gathered us all at the table and announced we were moving again. Across an ocean, I was devastated. Began bawling my eyes out over dinner. My dad got upset that I, a middle school girl, wasn't excited for his promotion and left the table. Mom looked at me and said, "Go to your room and dry it up. When you're done crying, come out and apologize to your dad." You're being so selfish. I didn't come out. Stayed in my room all night. Mom came in again later, and I stupidly thought she was going to comfort me. Nope. Again, she reiterated how selfish I was being and told me that I'd be fine and could start over again in this new state. I love my mom, but that night forever changed how much I could trust them with how I felt. I hid everything from them after that and moved out as soon as I could. Story 4. I was run over by a car when I was in my early teens, and I had to go through a couple of years of intense therapy after some pretty bad damage. So I was homebound, and my mom had to take care of me quite a bit. I also came out at 16 to my parents due to stress levels in the house. At one point, my mother and I were arguing about something, and she said, "If I had known I would be going through this much with you, I would not have had you." That pretty much ended our relationship at that point. I told her she was no longer my mother. She never apologized for it. At the age of 18, I made sure I moved away to go to college, and I never went back. There's more to it, but that's the condensed version. Story 41. My ex and I were together for 3+ years, but we weren't compatible. "I love you and only you," my girlfriend said to me precisely 3 days before she blocked me for said ex. Every time I hear about her through a mutual friend, I act as if I never heard of her. Story 42. Flat Earth, moon landing faked, COVID made my poisonous, and about 10 other conspiracies that came out close to a year later, if dating. Not much I could do. Story 43. When my ex-BF told me that "you're never there when I needed you the most." This was a few months after his father passed. The day his dad passed, I was at a music festival in San Diego, and I left within 30 minutes of being there and drove back to LA to support him. I was there for my ex and his mom during the funeral. I then had to go to a business trip on the East Coast and couldn't support him then. Somehow spending my weekends through the summer and helping him and his mom clean their house, apt building they had owned wasn't enough. There were more things, but that's the one that stung the most. Glad he's the ex now. Story 44. When my mom told someone I was abusing her, in reality, I was establishing healthy boundaries, and she didn't like that. She was no longer a safe person. I moved away and only contact her on holidays. It's been life-changing in the very best way. Story 45. The person who I used to listen complain about all their issues and absorb, and be there told me I had too many issues to be their friend. That's when I realized people are selfish and I can't really truly trust anyone. Story 46. I want to break up with you. 4.5 years in a relationship, I was thinking about proposing to her. Later turned out that she fell in love with someone else, and instead of telling me that she has feelings for someone and talking it through, She just straight up lied to me that she wants to be alone for some time. Yeah, if you want to be alone for some time, you're not going to jump on someone else's banana the next week. It changed my whole life, not just my relationship with her. Story 47. It's all right. Take all the time you need. I'll be right here. My girlfriend back in December. Back in December, we had barely been together 3 months, and I had a very hard situation in my life. I dropped her off after a date where we had been talking about it. She got out to leave, and I broke down crying. I'm talking sobbing. Snot and everything. She grabbed my hand and held me and said that to me. I knew I loved her already, but the way it changed the relationship was because in that moment, I had 100% decided I was gonna marry her. Q2 now, and we've talked about rings and got one picked out. Story 48. You were the one child that was never supposed to live with us. My mom, when I was young, suffered severe mental health problems due to horrific abuse as a kid. When I turned 3, my dad up and left with our neighbor and left my mom alone with 3 children with no support, no financial support, nothing. Over the years, this wore on her, and she went downhill. My sister started abusing me and fractured my arm. My mom forced my sister upon my dad because she couldn't cope, and I was in danger. A few years later, my brother went to stay with dad for a few months before he moved out. I was a lot younger than the other 2 and stayed with Mom alone. I was her carer. It got to a point where I was starving because she couldn't put food on the table, although could afford to drink every day. My sister had to fight tooth and nail for my stepmother to allow me to receive refuge at their home. Know that I knew this until a long time later. When I was finally taken in, a broken child, the first thing my stepmother said to me was those words. No word of comfort, not love, just a bitter reminder I did not belong in their. She said this in such a way I knew I was never to be welcomed. From then on, she abused me from 12 years old. Out of the horrendous things she said and did, though, that was always the one that affected me most. I now struggle to ever feel wanted or accepted. I always feel like a burden to the friends I call family, even though I'm independent and succeeding. I don't ask anyone from anyone and would rather be in my hand, miss and knees than ask for help. I wish it was different.